And good afternoon. Welcome to World Oregon's webinar on today, June 30th, 2025, with Stephen Cook from the Council on Foreign Relations. We'll be getting to our expert shortly. Thank you to all of you joining us from Oregon or around the country through our partners at the World Affairs Councils of America. We're thrilled to have an expert on this hot topic, ever changing, and we'll get to the program quite shortly. Just a few general words of welcome. If you haven't joined us before, just a reminder that this is a Zoom webinar. The only ones with audio and visual are the expert and World Oregon staff. Please place questions for the speaker in the Q&A function of Zoom. Meanwhile, in the chat function of Zoom, we will post some links that may be of interest to you about World Oregon or other matters. Again, I'd like to say a big thanks to those of you who are members or donors for World Oregon who help make this possible. If you haven't done that recently, we'd love to have you support us. Today is the last day of our fiscal year, and it's always great to support a nonprofit. Or if it's not us, maybe it's the World Affairs Council in your region that you're supporting, or it's CFR, because all of us need your support to be able to have these kinds of conversations. Again, we're thrilled to have Mr. Cook joining us here today. He is a columnist of foreign policy and
Mr. Cook. Who's Mr. Cook?
and the Enrico Mattei Senior Fellow for Middle East and the Africa Studies and Director of International Affairs Fellowship for Tenured International Relations Scholars at the Council on Foreign Relations. That's a long title.
Yeah, it's a big business card.
He is an expert on Arab and Turkish politics as well as U.S. Middle East policy. He's a graduate of many excellent universities, Vassar, Johns Hopkins SAIS Master's Program, the University of Pennsylvania. He's the author of the recently published The End of Ambition, America's Past, Present, and Future in the Middle East. He's a good friend of the World Affairs Councils of America, has done programs throughout the country. We are going to pass it over to him to open up the conversation. Then I will jump in with some questions from Tim and myself, and then we'll start incorporating your questions. So without further ado, Mr. Cook.
Every time someone says Mr. Cook, I look for my father. Anyway, thank you very much, Derek and Tim. It's a great pleasure to be with you folks at World Oregon or wherever you're calling it from this afternoon or whatever time of day it is. My task here today is to talk about the Middle East and where we are at this moment. And the last almost 3 weeks have really been, I think, rather extraordinary. The Israelis launched their Operation Rising Lion on the night of June 13th and carried on a military campaign against Iran, focusing specifically on its nuclear program, its ballistic missile program, a great underreported story of those of the Israeli campaign, and important regime sites in Iran. Of course, as the operation culminated, the United States undertook its own military operation against Iran, targeting the main nuclear sites at Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. There has been obviously a lot of debate about the wisdom of the American attack and the effect of the American attack. But let me start by saying that it seems clear from if we roll back from June 13th and we go back to October 7th, or actually October 9th, 2023, the Israelis essentially telegraphed what their plans were for the region in the aftermath of Hamas's bloody rampage through southern Israel 2 days earlier. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the time said that the Israeli goal was to change the Middle East. I don't think enough people paid attention to what he was saying. I don't think enough people gave credence to the kinds of things that the Israelis have said over the previous almost 2 years. When they say things like that, there is a tendency to downplay these types of statements. It's not necessarily Israel specific, but in Washington, people want to kind of massage statements and look for real meaning. I think in this case, the Israelis meant what they said and said what they meant, which was to change the region, that it was no longer tenable for them to live in a situation where there were Iran's proxies that were ringing the country, with the exception of the Jordanian border. But even there, the Iranians were seeking to destabilize the West Bank. and that they would no longer be willing to live with an Iranian nuclear program. And as we've seen, as this war has unfolded over the course of, as I said, almost 2 years now, the Israelis have turned their attention from one theater to the other. First, it being obviously Gaza, a fight that continues. Although, according to the president, he would like to see a ceasefire in the coming weeks or so. But the Israelis have, for better or worse, depending on where you stand on the issue and how you view Hamas, for better or worse, have significantly changed the Gaza Strip. Then the Israelis have significantly changed, and perhaps of all of the theaters in which they have in which they've engaged in military operations, the place that they've rendered the most change is in Lebanon, where after years and years and years of official Washington and analysts saying that the Israelis could not fight Hezbollah because it would leave most of the country in devastation. The Israelis actually undertook a military operation in September and October 2024 that rendered Hezbollah not necessarily toothless, but greatly weakened, to the point where both a new Lebanese government has the political space to extend its authority and sovereignty and start dismantling the state within the state that Iran and Hezbollah built over the course of almost 4 decades, and to the extent that Hezbollah was unable to muster forces to save Bashar al-Assad, who was part of Iran's axis of resistance and a critical component to Iran's Western Front. And subsequently, as I said, we have seen the Israelis take the fight directly to the Iranians in an effort, in their words, to cut off the head of the snake. This has resulted in, I think, profound change in the Middle East. Israel is in a better position security-wise, let me emphasize that, just security-wise, than it was on October 6th, 2023. Hamas is no longer a threat, which raises questions as to why the IDF is still fighting in the Gaza Strip. The Hezbollah was told by the Lebanese government and itself made a decision not to join in the fight between Israel and Iran when Iran, while it was firing its own ballistic missiles and drones at Israel, had beseeched Hezbollah to do the same. The Lebanese government told Hezbollah not to engage in hostilities. Syria has a new government. There are many, many questions about the Syrian government, but today there are reports that the Syrian government and the Israeli government are in advanced stages of negotiations over normalization of relations, which would be a stunning, stunning development and a direct result of what's happened over the course of the last 21 months. And then, of course, is a greatly weakened Iran. There are a whole host of implications of what a greatly weakened Iran means. We just really don't know. Will Iran be more amenable to negotiation? That, I think, was the thinking of President Trump when on June 21st, the night of Operation Midnight Hammer, he came out at 10 o'clock Eastern time and declared that the United States had obliterated the Iranian nuclear program and called for negotiation. Neither does it seem that the Iranian nuclear program neither does it seem has it been obliterated, though it's undoubtedly the case that it has suffered significant setbacks and damage. Nor do the Iranians yet signaled that they're willing to engage in a negotiation. There are others who believe that there's a possible pathway for the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow a regime that many of them hate. We haven't seen a lot of evidence of this yet. We've seen instead a crackdown on the part of the Iranian regime to prevent that from happening. So if we're taking stock over the course of the last 2 years, I would say that at a certain level, the Israelis have been able to force, underlining the word force a lot of change in the Middle East. But they have yet to be able to convert this change to an overall change to the geostrategic situation in the region. And that is to say that as long as there is an Iranian regime in place, and this Iranian regime at an ontological level, at its very essence, is hostile to the United States and seeks to destroy Israel, the Israelis are confronted with a changed region, but not one that is in which this conflict that has been going on since the late 1970s is by any stretch of the imagination over. If there was a more benign regime in place in Iran, it would certainly mean that the conflict would be over. But as long as this regime survives or some other type of regime survives, there's always the possibility of a fiercer Iranian regime, and the conflict continues. In all of this, the United States, President Trump, has declared once again that he seeks a deal, a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, and that he seeks a nuclear agreement with Iran. He does not seem to be any closer to those two goals as a result of Operation Midnight Hammer or the Israeli operation in Iran, though Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who the president calls his partner, has indicated that there is an opportunity possibly for a ceasefire and for an expansion of the Abraham Accords, notably including Syria. That's one I'll have to see to believe, but nevertheless, this is the state of play as it stands today, June 30th, 2025, 3:15 p.m. East Coast time, 12:15 Pacific time. I'll stop there. Brief overview. For me, the most fun of these sessions are to answer your questions. So, Derek, fire away.
Well, that was great, and I especially like the last part. It reminds me of the NPR politics podcast. They said this podcast was recorded at, and they state the time
Well,
because
with the Middle East, especially over
exactly,
the last couple of years, you have to say that at this moment,
absolutely.
because anything can happen 5 minutes from now.
Yep. And as for those of you who joined us in our webinar last week with Peter Baker, the New York Times White House correspondent, note that he touched on some of these issues which have changed in the last couple of days. In fact, I saw this morning when I was looking for something else in the news that it looks like the administration is formally now lifting the sanctions on Syria, or they're in the process of that. I saw some kind of statement from the White House about that. I mean, while keeping them on the former regime, do you think that will is an inducement to help things along in a more peaceful way with regards to Syria?
Well, this is part of the president's, promises made, promises kept, or was that the previous president? I don't know which one has used that, but when President Trump was in Saudi Arabia in May, he met with Ahmed al-Shara, the new leader of Syria, who was a leader of an Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, and then established another organization that goes by the acronym HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was also part of this this constellation of jihadist movements battling the Assad regime. After the Assad regime fell, in large part thanks to HTS and other militias, he's now become the self-declared president of Syria, and President Trump, as an inducement or incentive to good behavior, and as a favor to his two friends, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, promised Ahmed al-Shara that he would lift U.S. sanctions on Syria, and now and instructed Secretary of State Marco Rubio to begin the process of lifting sanctions and normalizing relations between the United States and Syria. In the month or so since that encounter, the president's ambassador to Turkey and special envoy to Syria has visited Damascus and paved the way for the reopening of the U.S. embassy there and the lifting of sanctions. So this is just a culmination of things that have been underway for the better part of the last 6 weeks. What is extraordinary here is that Ahmed al-Shara was a leader of a organization that was part of this global jihadist movement, was engaged in violence against Americans in Iraq, has never actually eschewed the kind of Islamist extremist worldview. I think that the media has mostly gotten that wrong. He broke with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, who was killed during President Trump's first term, or quite honestly, killed himself as American special forces were moving in on him. Um, he broke with him because Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi wanted to absorb the group that Ahmed al-Shara led, called Jabhat al-Nusra, into ISIS. And Ahmed al-Shara calculated that this would mean a diminution of his power and profile within the global jihadist movement, and he broke off and created his own organization. It wasn't really doctrinal. And according to eyewitness accounts of people who had to endure the rule of HTS in Idlib province, the province that remained beyond the Assad regime's control. It wasn't perhaps as bad as it was living under ISIS, but it was still living under a regime that routinely violated people's human rights, their civil rights, and was essentially Islamist supremacist. So we'll have to see what happens with Syria going forward, but clearly the United States sees Ahmed al-Shara as their guy and are pushing him with a variety of incentives to normalize relations with Israel.
Yeah, interesting. Keeping on talking about the current administration, Steve Witkoff is the president's special envoy for the Middle East. Loved your thoughts on that. I mean, he's of course a real estate developer guy who's taken the lead versus career diplomats, and of course, there's been a lot of controversy about the way that the Trump administration has handled the State Department. We were just talking before the program that there's rumors of a reduction in force coming any day now that would include Foreign Service officers of the State Department. And so, what do you think is the assessment of you and other experts in the region of Mr. Witkoff as an envoy, as opposed to a more traditional approach that other administrations have taken?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of smirking, Derek, because I wrote a column in my regular where I regularly appear at Foreign Policy Magazine. That they put the title on it was "The President's Real Estate Envoy to the Middle East," in which I raised a whole host of questions about the applicability of negotiating over the purchase of a fancy hotel or the building of a mall to negotiating with the Iranians over their nuclear program or hammering out a ceasefire between Israelis and Palestinians. Not all negotiation is the same. And although I'm sure that Mr. Witkoff has his views on these issues, and by the way, he also is working on Ukraine, has his views on these issues, he certainly doesn't have a deeper appreciation for some of the underlying issues at play in
Right.
all of these things. And so I was concerned that we would not get anywhere. And in fact, we didn't. Um, the Israelis and Hamas are no closer to a ceasefire than they were before Mr. Witkoff's efforts. Now, of course, you have to give people who are special envoys to this conflict a break. Failure has been the norm, and it's not as
Right.
if these people are dumb. It's that this is a extraordinarily difficult conflict for which, from my own perspective, and have written about over and over again, I don't think that there is actually a solution. But nevertheless, the president's message to the American people and to the Israelis and Palestinians and Iranians was that he was breaking from tradition and that he was going to use, his friend, his golf partner, and dear friend and fellow real estate executive to hammer out these deals, and didn't seem to think that this would be too hard. But like I said, a real estate deal is, you somehow kind of meet in the middle. But when the parties in the Middle East are engaged in existential conflicts, and I know we use the word existential too much, but when they're engaged in existential conflict, it's hard to get to yes. And that's what I think that Witkoff one failed to realize ahead of time and is now becoming all too aware of.
So as we look at all these potential ceasefires for the multiple fronts in this, I mean, today, Israel, took some more action in Gaza with more displacement orders and airstrikes that killed quite a number of Palestinians. You know, and I believe there's an Israeli minister coming into D.C. for some more talks about that. I mean, do you hold out any hope for a ceasefire in the Israeli-Gaza war or release of hostages or?
Right. So, no. in a word, uh, the IDF senior command told the Israeli cabinet at a meeting last evening, Israel time, that it was in their view that all of Israel's military goals had been met in the Gaza Strip, and that it was time to declare victory and negotiate an agreement that would bring all of the hostages home. Um, the cabinet meeting ended without any decisions being made. While that was happening, there was still intensive rounds of airstrikes in the northern Gaza Strip, and as you point out, orders to evacuate the area. Um, it, it it seems unlikely that Prime Minister Netanyahu's partners to the right of him will agree to anything other than a an outcome of this conflict in which Israel fully controls the Gaza Strip.
Hmm.
Um, because it seems clear to me, and others I think don't want to kind of face up to it. It seems clear to me that their ultimate goal is an Israeli occupation and resettlement of the Gaza Strip. I've spent time with these folks. They're coy about resettlement of the Gaza Strip, but it seems clear, given the fact that they have held a number of rallies near the Gaza border fence calling for precisely that, and that they have a more potent political argument that more Israelis are willing to hear out as a result of October 7th than when Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip in the late summer of 2005. In the late summer of 2005, they said withdrawal will bring us no security. We will be attacked over and over again. And as a result of October 7th, that is a much more potent political argument. So I don't see those agreeing. The right and even members of Netanyahu's own Likud party agree with that assessment. At the same time, I don't see Hamas coughing up hostages. It is their only point of leverage with the Israelis. What would prevent the Israelis from getting all of their people back, including the dead ones, of which there are about half of the remaining numbers of hostages in the Gaza Strip? What would prevent the Israelis from getting all of those people back and then continuing to prosecute the war? Their good word to President Trump. I mean, everybody in the Middle East lies. So it seems to me that although President Trump has more leverage on Prime Minister Netanyahu than he did prior to Operation Midnight Hammer, in which he can say to Netanyahu, "Hey, um, you your diplomacy failed to convince George W. Bush, Barack Obama, me in my first term, and Biden. And now I've done you this huge solid. I have gone after the Iranian nuclear program. You owe me." That certainly gives the president a lot more leverage. But it's very, very difficult to see how this coalition and this government survives in a ceasefire before the right wing of the coalition is satisfied. And I find it hard to believe that Hamas will ever give up all of the hostages.
And how much do you think that is then mixed in with the corruption allegations against Netanyahu and his, long delayed trial? I mean, is that how much of a factor is that?
I mean, look, there's obviously, Netanyahu would like to stay out of jail. Um, I think, though, that grand narrative obscures the grave security threat that the Israelis confronted on October
Mhm.
7th, for which Netanyahu is at fault. Um, so I don't believe I'm probably because I've been working on the Middle East so long, despite my sunny disposition, I am one of the most cynical humans on the face of the earth. I don't see how the IDF senior command puts themselves in the service of Prime Minister Netanyahu's political goals. Um, at the same time, there is an exigency here to maintain the coalition so that the prime minister remains out of jail.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I would say, and there's too much in this kind of world of incredible complexity. There's too many people who are out there saying this is why X has happened.
Right.
I think that the war has continued because Hamas continues to hold hostages, and um, Prime Minister Netanyahu has politics, and his
Yeah.
politics are a right wing that doesn't want to give it up, and he also has personal parochial interests in maintaining the coalition.
Yeah.
I think that's a multi-factor explanation for why we're at it. I think to focus on just one factor is to miss the larger picture here.
Right. Getting back to Iran and the strikes there, I mean, there have been dueling, leaked intelligence reports. There's been discussion of, how much of this is connected to, the path that we potentially could have been on before President Trump exited from the Iran nuclear deal in his first administration. I mean, what is your assessment as far as like the woulda, coulda, and where we are now, and as far as the efficacy of the action?
Well, I'm not going to get into the bomb damage assessment because I have no information like
Right.
99% of the people who are talking about bomb damage assessment.
Right.
I'm also going to say, and you've worked in the government, Derek, so you know that people leak for reasons.
Yeah.
And we also know that the director of national intelligence isn't really an intelligence professional, but she's engaged in a political project. So all of these things need to be, and we, given the, pardon my term, I'm going to use a very, very specific political science term here. The grossness of our politics
Mm.
would makes it so that everybody decides on their narrative depend on where they stand
Right.
on a particular issue, whether they hate President Trump or they love President Trump. They stand, and so we'll never actually know. And it's a really, really bad way to make foreign policy. On the bomb damage assessment, when congressional staff members have called me to talk to me about this, I'd say, that they should pay much more attention to the Israeli discussion of bomb damage assessment because they're much more adult about it.
Mm.
Of course, the president has put us in this situation by declaring at 10 p.m. Eastern on June 21st that the United States had totally obliterated the Iran nuclear program. That's an extraordinarily high bar that was only inviting this kind of debate. And my argument here is that, Roy Cohn-esque bombast doesn't work when physics are involved. Um, I think, if you want to relitigate the JCPOA, let me just say that I was not one of the Washington, D.C. Middle East analysts who got myself spun up about the JCPOA. My view was it was an arms control agreement. Not all arms control agreements are perfect. Um, it had been working. The president breached the agreement and left it. And then during President Biden's term, the Iranians put a lot of effort into developing their nuclear program that
Mhm.
would have otherwise been restrained by the JCPOA. But here we are. I mean, my criticism of the JCPOA was that there was a hunch that this would be a pathway to a better relationship between the United States and Iran, when there was actually no evidence that the Iranians wanted a better
Mm.
relationship with the United States. They wanted sanctions relief and were willing to put their program under restriction for different pieces of it 10, 12, or 15 years while continuing their clandestine work on their program.
Yeah.
Where would we be had he not breached the JCPOA? I think that there would be critical components of the program that would have not progressed as they did, but that the clandestine work of the program would have proceeded, and that was the
Mm.
weapons work. Was mostly it was the clandestine piece of this. The Israelis have their own intelligence, and may very well have had done what they did anyway, whether the JCPOA remained in
Mm.
place or not, because they had always said that they are not a party to the JCPOA, and that once the Iranians crossed a certain threshold, they would take action. They apparently believed that the Iranians had crossed the threshold towards weaponization, in which it would allow the Iranians to advance towards a weapon relatively quickly, and therefore they took the action that they did.
Yeah. We're starting to get questions coming in from the audience. Encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A. I got a question here. I'm going to bounce back to Israel, Gaza.
Those weren't questions from the audience. Those were just yours.
Those are mostly questions that
Very good.
Tim and I have been working on
You
in the
and
past.
Tim, great team.
And one more sort of that's sort of directly relevant to World Oregon. In 2023, we had Iranian journalist activist Masha Alinejad speak for us. She is survivor of a foiled assassination plot.
Three.
And it was a very inspiring talk. And of course, her focus was on women's rights and
Hmm.
hijab, but really was focused against the government of Iran and just wondering, is there legit fear about more things like that as far as attack on activists or others who oppose, or is that get sort of blown out of proportion as far as like sleeper cells or things like that we've heard bandied about on cable news?
Well, first of all, opposition figures and activists within Iran at the moment are facing a massive crackdown by the regime. And there is a dragnet underway um, by the Iranian government to find anybody who collaborated with Israel or expressed support for the for the Israelis in terms of liberating Iran from the Islamic Republic.
Hmm.
Um, the Iranians have demonstrated that they have global reach in terms of both terrorism and cyber attacks. And so I don't know to what extent, I don't watch cable news so much. Uh,
It's a healthier approach, I think, probably.
I mean, come on. The Bear or CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News.
Yeah,
The, the Stick or, and I mean, like, there's really no comparison here. Um, so, I mean, I like to watch it. I like when my family watches it when I'm on those programs,
yeah,
but I myself
sure.
don't necessarily. Anyway, um, I simply don't have good insight into the extent there are sleeper cells. Look,
Okay.
the Iranians tried to assassinate the president. They've tried to assassinate a number of figures from his first uh,
Secretary Pompeo.
Secretary Pompeo, other people deeper down in the bureaucracy that I'm sure none of you, Derek, may know, but others may not know. People like Brian Hook, who was a coordinator of the Iran policy during the first administration, um, that they tried to kill the Saudi ambassador in the United States. So there's a whole host of things that the Iranians have been up to. And of course, they have a long history. The 1993 attack on the Jewish center in Buenos Aires
Right.
and the Israeli embassy there. So there is a global reach. So I don't think that it's something that, just because it's said on Fox News, it should be dismissed. I think
Sure.
people
Yeah.
should be concerned about. But to what extent it exists is very, very, very hard to say.
Sure. Question from the audience going back to the Israel-Gaza war, quote, is there any incentive that can be given to Hamas to come to peace, dash that will be acceptable to Israel and Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition partners?
Well, I mean, it's one of the ways in which the Israelis and the United States have sought a way around this is by offering the Hamas leadership safe passage out of Gaza. Okay, we won't kill you, but you have to get out and return our hostages, and then we'll stop. They have not been willing to do that. And one can understand the Hamas leadership or what's left of it. The Israelis actually killed one of the last remaining founding members of Hamas in Gaza just the other day. But there's been a real split between the Hamas political office, which is based in Doha, and the leadership within Gaza, which is that the guys who are willing to do a deal with the Israelis spend a lot of their time in the Four Seasons Hotel in Doha, and we spend our time underground engaged in resistance.
Mm.
And so my sense is that leadership who has rejected safe passage out of Gaza don't want to look like the guys in Doha who enjoy, living pretty large off the Qatari government. So, and there's an existential issue here for Hamas. They launched this attack on October 7th with the intention to destroy Israel. I'm not embellishing anything. You can
Right.
look at their statement announcing Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, which was based on their 1988 charter, not the fraudulent revision of it that came, 20 years later. So that has been the problem that the Israelis have had throughout, which is that they haven't been able to fight unfettered in Gaza, believe it or not. Believe it or not, this is their argument, because there are hostages there, and Hamas
Mm.
knows it. And that's why Hamas won't cough them up, because they know that the Israelis will not adhere to any agreement after they get back every single last one of their hostages.
Mm. We haven't talked about Lebanon much. Of course, they with Hezbollah and everything there. I mean, where do you see things standing? I mean, it's been a challenging several years for the country and for other issues, the big
Several
explosion.
decades. Yeah.
Yeah. So where do you see things going now with Hezbollah so weakened and
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think a rather extraordinary moment. I was, let me just, by way of anecdote, I was, um, pardon me for the DC humble brag. I was at the White House last June, chatting with senior members of the Biden administration. And not only were we talking about my new book, The End of Ambition, but what I was particularly interested in talking to them about was escalation in Lebanon.
Hmm.
And that it was my view that Israel was going to escalate in Lebanon, and they said they didn't think that that was going to happen because it would take 30 years to rebuild Tel Aviv after the Israelis initiated a conflict with Hezbollah, because all of these rockets would rain down on Tel Aviv and it would end up just being a massively destructive conflict. It ended up not being a massively destructive conflict. By the way, not only was I in the White House in June, said that I was in Israel in September for the beeper operation and the subsequent
Hmm.
walkie-talkie operation, and was leaving the next day, and my plane was on the tarmac when the walkie-talkie operation was revealed, and I said, "Oh no, please, no rockets. I really want to go home." Um, Sort of, it's all about me moment.
Hmm.
In any event, the uh, the taking down of Hezbollah, the greatly weakening of Hezbollah, was something that uh, the Israelis had planned for and did with, I think, alacrity, hoping, hoping against hope that a new Lebanese government would be able to assert its sovereignty. And a lot of people like me said, well, it's one thing to kill Nasrallah, decapitate the organization, weaken it. Lightning would have to strike twice in order to get a more decent government in Lebanon that would start dismantling Hezbollah's state within a state and could extend its sovereignty to southern Lebanon,
Hmm.
and it basically bring some peace to the Israel-Lebanese frontier.
Hmm.
Lightning seems to have struck twice. I mean, at least so far, there's a new Lebanese president, there's a new Lebanese prime minister who both seem determined to tear down the state within a state that Hezbollah built with Iranian funds.
Hmm.
The Lebanese armed forces have exerted the Lebanese state's authority in places. It's not perfect. It's not always to the Israeli satisfaction. But as I said in my opening remarks, during this latest episode, while the Israelis initiated this conflict with Iran, Hezbollah, which was built specifically to be Iran's second strike capability, was kept on the sideline by dint of the Lebanese government warning Hezbollah not
Hmm.
to fire on Israel, and the fact that Hezbollah really doesn't have the kind of capability to fire on Israel. Israel has maintain the ceasefire using force from time to time, recognizing that the UN forces in southern Lebanon are practically useless. And this has so far
Hmm.
worked out for the Lebanese. Now, just because it's working at 3:40 p.m. Eastern on June 30th, 2025, doesn't mean it's going to work at 3:40 p.m. Eastern time on July 1.
Right.
But up until this point, President Aoun and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam have done things that people did not expect would happen. And that's actually, just as an aside,
Yeah.
that's the story of this entire episode. Many, many things that people said could never happen, would never happen, were impossible, they'd never see, actually has happened over the course of the last 21 months.
Hmm.
Lots of red lines have been crossed. Um, One in particular, Israel and Iran have proved that they can conduct a war even though they don't have a border. And
Hmm.
the sort of red line, that uneasy equilibrium between the two countries, because they were separated and because they had never experienced direct combat with each other, has now been broken. And
Hmm.
that's actually more dangerous than good. But I'm
Hmm.
just pointing out that these are
Yeah.
things that people said would never happen.
Right. You referenced your book. My understanding is in the book, which I've not yet read, but it breaks down to three distinct eras: success, failure, present uncertainty. Can you dive in a little bit more on some of your findings in the books and how that might apply to what we're dealing with now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to tell too much because maybe there's some people who will read it or buy it.
And I put the link in the chat,
Oh,
so if
well,
you
thank
want
you very
to.
much. I mean, I am staring down the barrel. One of my kids is threatening to go to medical school, so My royalties won't pay for it, but
Yeah.
a little bit, a little bit. No, all kidding aside. So there's a period where in which I say that the United States was relatively successful in the Middle East. There were moral costs, there were setbacks, but by dint of what policymakers wanted to do, which was ensure the free flow of energy resources, help to ensure Israeli security, and ensure that the United States remained predominant in the region in the service of those two other goals, the United States was successful. Then there was a period of failure in which the United States used its power to try to transform the Middle East, and the return on investment was less than zero. What's the difference between those two eras? Is one thing that I tease out in the book. In the first era, where there was relative success, the United States was focused on its core interests and preventing bad things from happening to those
Hmm.
interests. So preventing disruptions to the free flow of oil out of the region, helping to prevent threats to Israeli security, and preventing a country or group of countries from threatening America's predominance in the region. The word there was prevent,
Hmm.
preventing bad things from happening. In a subsequent era, which I identify begins in 1991, after um, the United States pushed Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, restored Kuwait's sovereignty in February 26, 1991. And then, exactly 10 months later, on December 26, 1991, when the Soviet Union finally collapsed, American policymakers, analysts, journalists, in a bipartisan, Democrats, Republicans, sought to use American power to transform the world, in particular the Middle East, to make good things happen. Build a
Hmm.
Palestinian state, promote democracy, change Iraqi society, those kinds of things. All of those things were trying to make good things that happen.
Hmm.
So ironically, we're more successful when we try to prevent bad things from happening, and we can be constructive. We've been nothing but destabilizers when we try to use American power to make good things happen. And now we have this present uncertainty, and the question is what to do about it. And I really take on the argument that has been, if you were paying close attention to the news recently, by the school of thought now known as restrainers, who say the United States really doesn't have an interest in the region, that the United States should withdraw from the region, at best should be an offshore balancer, that is to provide its partners with a means to establish an equilibrium in the region so that the United States doesn't have to, versus those who want to engage in, a more robust American presence aimed at regime change and so on and so forth. And what I say is that neither of those are the appropriate way to go, and that there is a way to be in the region that's realistic and smart, and that we can achieve very specific goals.
Hmm.
With that, you'll have to read the book.
That's a great tease, and appreciate that summary. So, as far as negotiations go, are we going to continue then to have these, a little bit here, a little bit there, or do you think there's any hope of, some kind of larger, like Oslo style peace process akin to days of old, or is it just going to be who can tell because we have a more unorthodox approach to things in this current administration?
In terms of Israeli-Palestinian,
Yeah, and also, yeah, Palestinian, but then some of these other ones that we've mentioned. I mean, you got now the ceasefire between Israel and Iran, and then there's potential ceasefire with Gaza, and I
I think it's
mean,
probably more likely that you'll see Witkoff showing up in Muscat, the capital of Oman, or in Rome to talk to the Iranians at some point. Of course, we don't know what's happening, whether the Oman or Qatari back channel is working, what's happening with other Arab or Middle Eastern capitals with regard to this. But certainly, the president has signaled that he's interested in negotiation. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, didn't do him or the Iranians any favors by issuing a recorded message that was very aggressive.
hmm,
And to my mind, just underlines the sort of unremitting hostility of the representatives of the Islamic Republic, which I think I mentioned it before, at an ontological level, at an essence, is implacably hostile to the United States. But still, I think that there's a greater possibility of negotiations between Iran and the United States than there is between Israel and the Palestinians. First, look, no one, neither Israelis nor Palestinians look back on Oslo fondly. So we're not going to recreate the Oslo process. Plus,
yeah,
things have changed dramatically
sure,
since then, and I don't think anybody has general interest in kind of international conferences on the Middle East. And so my view is that, and I alluded to it before, I don't think that there's a real resolution to this conflict. If you
yeah,
take a look at the most dynamic, if not the most popular, the most dynamic ends of the Israeli and Palestinian political spectrums. You get the settler movement and a broader kind of religious Zionist movement um, that has a particular view about a two-state solution. That is, there won't be one. And then you add to that a lot of Israelis who have endured the last 21 months and who would like a two-state solution but don't see any pathway to it. But as I said, the most dynamic end of the political spectrum is Israel's radical right. And then on the
Yeah.
Palestinian front, even though they've taken hit after hit after hit, and lots of the leadership are dead, the most dynamic end of the political spectrum is Hamas. Those are one-staters against one-staters. There's no touch point for
Yeah.
compromise or negotiation there. Okay, now let's play a thought experiment. Let's imagine a moment where you have an Israeli prime minister and a Palestinian Authority president that are actually interested in a negotiation, unlike what we have right now. The problem is that Israel's minimum demands of the Palestinians for peace are things that the Palestinians couldn't possibly deliver because it's too heavy a political lift for them.
Mm.
And the Palestinians' minimum demands for peace are things that no Israeli government could deliver because it's too heavy a political lift for them.
Yeah.
That's what's been the situation throughout the Oslo process that began in September 1993. The United States trying to alter that dynamic, making it so that Palestinians could make that compromise or that Israelis could make that compromise without breaking their domestic politics. And we've been unable to do it. And so, for those two reasons, I don't see productive negotiations. Again, despite my sunny disposition and a lot of fun that I like to have, working on the Middle East has made me quite cynical. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is. Maybe there's now a greater hunger and attentiveness for the need for a two-state solution. But my experience, which is now well more than 2 decades, is that when Israelis and Palestinians uh, get to the abyss, they don't look over, hold hands, and step back from it. They look over, hold hands, and jump over it together.
Hmm. So while the fighting continues and the chances of peace are not are somewhat bleak at the best, what do you see for the future of just the humanitarian assistance to Gaza and the dire situation there for civilians?
Look, I think the situation in Gaza is horrifying. I think at some point Israel's operations will come to an end, but you're going to find in between the Israelis' operations coming to an end warlordism. We're already starting to see some of that in Gaza. Hamas against gangs
Hmm.
in Gaza and families, clans who hate Hamas, fighting with each other and so on and so forth, with poor civilians caught in the middle, who essentially become wards of the international community.
Hmm.
And the aid, whatever arrangement is made for aid, that's what that's what it seems to me the future is. I mean, obviously the president's ideas for Gaza Largo, are sheer lunacy. And I think there's a greater chance that you see Israeli occupation than you see some sort of decent kind of uh, reconstruction of Gaza with the
Hmm.
help of the international community. I know what appeared in the Israeli newspaper Israel Hayom about how Emiratis and Egyptians and others will send forces into it, it, the idea is right. The idea is right, but getting from the idea stage to actually
Hmm.
implementing something that's decent that will help the people in Gaza is very, very hard politically.
Yeah. So an interesting question from the audience. I'm not sure if you've read James Barr's book. The questioner asks about his book, Lords of the Desert, the battle between the United States and Great Britain for the supremacy of the modern Middle East. But he asks about, is there a way for the US and UK to use its special relationship for the future of the Middle East, since, of course, those two countries have had a long history of their involvement in the region. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work. I am not.
I'm not familiar with it. I don't think, part of the problem with an argument like that, at least the way in which Derek, you are relaying it to me is that uh, it takes the agency away from the people who live there,
Hmm.
and puts it all on the United States and Britain. And, if we're somehow going to reorder the region, because we have special relationships. I mean, I don't think there are any takers, to be completely honest with you. I think, there are a lot of governments in the region who want, support and help from the United States, but I'm not convinced that they want some sort of American-British mandate for the region and that it imposes on them. I think you have a new generation of leaders, particularly in the Gulf, who want to order the region how they see fit, and others who are going to resist American dictates, including American partners.
Yeah. We talked a little before the webinar started about the U.S. Some of the big changes the Trump administration has made to U.S. soft power.
Yeah.
I don't know how much effect this impacts in the Middle East versus other regions of the world, but whether that's USAID or foreign broadcasting or U.S. universities, both sort of governmental and non-governmental soft power. If you might want to comment a little bit about that, to what extent that changes the U.S. Abilities to influence items in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I was commenting every time the president unveils some sort of like plan for the Middle East, whether it's Gaza Largo or, this alleged plan that these guys, thank you so much, that it's later in the day here, folks. This is desperately needed. That involves the United States providing some sort of assistance to the region. I say, well, but of course, the president has kneecapped the federal government's ability to help. How do you provide aid and assistance if you've abolished the U.S. Agency for International Development? How do you respond to emergencies if your entire apparatus of your State Department dedicated towards stabilization in crisis situations has been disbanded? There's really no way. There's really no way to do it. As flawed as you may believe that these bureaus and agencies may have been, and of course the press has played up some of the kind of more ridiculous things that they've done over time. But those are also a group of dedicated professionals who, and I'm not just saying this because you're a former Foreign Service officer, Derek, who have played important roles in providing assistance
Yeah.
to people in need around the world. So I think the president's view is the United States will, negotiate these deals, impose whatever it is, and then let the people most affected by it pay for it and deal with it. There's been a pattern of that going back way before he was even the president of the United States. I grew up in the 80s in the New York metropolitan area, and I remember Donald Trump, the developer, taking out full page ads in, the New York Post, the Daily News, Long Island Newsday, demanding that the Gulf states pay for security in that the U.S. provides in the Gulf, or that NATO pay more. Well, here we are. Here we are. He's doing that. I'm like reliving 1985 every time he opens his mouth and talks about this kind of thing. So that's why this idea of Emiratis, Egyptians, and others coming into Gaza is attracted to him. But it also would require the United States, and we just don't have. He's undermined that capacity. On the broadcasting, I thought it was amazing. The Israelis undertook their Operation Rising Lion, and then the United States took Operation Midnight Hammer, and somewhere in between, the Trump administration quietly called back Persian-speaking journalists who had been fired from the Voice of America. Oh, we need an information strategy, or we want to communicate to the Iranian people? Do we have any Persian speakers who can do that? Oh, no, we fired them a month ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed that
Somebody smart said, oh, we should bring them back, but they should never have been let go in the first place.
Right. We're almost to the top of the hour. Just and there's a lot more we dive into, but I guess what are you looking at? You said, as of June 30th, 2025, are there a few things that you would suggest audience members look at, or maybe there's a few sources, if it's not the cable news, maybe it's or your column, and in
You
foreign.
took the words right out of my mouth. My column, of course.
Yeah.
Uh,
What else would you point people to track this, and what should they look for to kind of see where way we may be headed?
well, first of all, I mean, if you're looking for things that I've been looking for in the region to kind of tip me off, like how things are going to go, let's start with that, and then I can talk about,
Yeah,
where what I think are kind of
sure.
quality. What are the Iranian people doing right now?
Hmm.
What is the Iranian government doing with to reconstitute its nuclear program to the extent that we can tell are things that I am concerned about. What are the Israelis doing with regard to Iran? They promised that they, have eyes on Iran. Will they undertake military action? Will they break the ceasefire if they see something? Um, what happened to the uranium at Fordo? Where is
Hmm.
it? There are all those trucks. Where is it? Those
Yeah.
are the kinds of things that I'm most interested in because they would suggest there's implications of this conflict for it. If the Iranian people are organizing, that sort of reinforces part of the Israeli strategy here, which was to help create a pathway for Iranians to rise up against their regime. The Israelis will deny it, but if you look at what they targeted, clearly that's was part of what they were doing. Whether they thought they would be successful, they weren't. By the way, the most successful part of their operation has been going after Iran's ability to manufacture ballistic missiles. Because
Hmm.
by estimation of the U.S. intelligence community, within 10 years, Iran would have one of the largest inventories of ballistic missiles in the world. Anyway, where am I going to get information? I'm going straight to news from that part of the world. Selectively, of course, because some of it
Sure.
is ridiculous and some of it isn't. But, on Israel news, I tend to gravitate towards Times of Israel rather than Haaretz. On Palestine news, and I also talk to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um, there are a variety of English language Palestinian sources that are important and generally very good. A publication out of Washington that sort of covers each piece of the region is called El Monitor, which is very good and has journalists on the ground. Arab News is a good English language source coming out of Saudi Arabia. It's better than it's ever been. It used to be not very good. Al Arabiya English is pretty good. The National out of the UAE is a good paper. If you're thinking if like all of that is too much work for you, um, I think that hands down the best Middle East team in U.S. mainstream news is the Wall Street Journal's team.
Hmm.
By far, the best journalists on the ground in the region is the Wall Street Journal. If you don't want to read the opinions and editorials of the Wall Street Journal,
Sure.
fine. But there's like 5 or 6 of them, and they're excellent and just all around, just I think top notch. So those are some suggestions I
Yeah.
think are useful.
Well, Stephen, I appreciate so much your expertise and your candor and encouraging people to support good journalism. I encourage folks to support the Council on Foreign Relations as a longtime partner of ours and the World Affairs Councils of America. Support your local council. If you're in Oregon, support us because we want to try to have these nonpartisan conversations where we can talk about these challenging issues where, as Stephen notes there's not an obvious easy solution to, and but we want to be able to have these healthy civic discussions. I appreciate your time. I wish you good luck, and I know you're doing some more programs this week with some other World Affairs Council chapters, and so stay caffeinated and to date. So thanks again, Stephen, for everything.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. Thank you, Tim. Thank you to those of you who have come in. Thank you for your very, very smart questions. It's a lot of fun. I just want to say by caveat, which I said at the beginning, that nothing on the shelves behind me are necessarily an indication of my, support. I'm not advocating for them, with the exception of the Yankees. There's Yankee Stadium there and Run DMC. Otherwise, it's just stuff I've collected or books that I've read. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks for that caveat, and I wish everyone a peaceful day. And thank you again for being engaged in world affairs. All the best.
Thanks.